When you think of Mercedes-Benz, you probably picture large, luxury sedans, powerful engines, and expensive cars. That was the Mercedes-Benz people knew. But in the early 1980s, Mercedes decided to do something very different. They built a small sedan. It was called the 190. And somehow, this small Benz would go on to become one of the most important cars in Mercedes-Benz history. But what makes that story interesting isn't simply that Mercedes built a smaller car. It's that Mercedes was trying to solve a much bigger problem. Could the company build a compact sedan without compromising what made a Mercedes a Mercedes? Could it make the car smaller, lighter, and more efficient while still giving drivers the same feeling of engineering, durability, safety, and quality they expected from a much larger Mercedes? That was the challenge, and the answer would eventually become known as the W201. To understand why the 190 became such a big deal, we have to go back to the beginning. Before the 190 became a legend, it was simply an ambitious idea inside Mercedes-Benz. A smaller car, a new market, and a huge challenge. Mercedes had spent decades building its reputation around substantial, sophisticated automobiles. Its cars were designed to feel solid, comfortable, and almost over-engineered. The three-pointed star represented more than luxury. It represented engineering. Mercedes buyers expected a car that could handle long-distance driving, poor roads, high speeds, and years of use without losing its character. But by the late 1970s, the automotive world was changing. Fuel prices were becoming a major concern. Governments were introducing tougher emissions and safety regulations. European buyers were becoming increasingly interested in smaller, more efficient cars. And Mercedes was facing another important problem. The company was strong in the traditional luxury market, but there was a growing group of buyers who wanted the Mercedes experience without buying a large, expensive sedan. Mercedes needed a new answer. But this wasn't simply a matter of taking one of its larger cars and making it smaller. If Mercedes wanted to enter this new market, it had to prove something. It had to prove that a smaller Mercedes could still feel like a Mercedes, and that would require a completely different approach. The answer would eventually become the W201, the project that would create the 190. But the 190's story was far from over. Mercedes had already proven that a smaller car could carry the three-pointed star with pride. Now the company wanted to answer a much more dangerous question. How far could it push the W201? Because building a compact Mercedes was one thing. Turning that compact Mercedes into a serious performance car was something completely different. And that challenge would lead to some of the most exciting versions of the 190 ever built. By the middle of the 1980s, the 190 had already established itself as a successful compact sedan. It was comfortable, it was efficient, it was exceptionally well engineered. But Mercedes-Benz wasn't satisfied. The company wanted the W201 to become something more, a driver's car, a performance car. And if Mercedes was going to enter the world of high-performance compact sedans, there was one company it couldn't ignore. BMW. The rivalry gets serious. By this point, BMW had already built a strong reputation for combining luxury with sporty handling. The BMW 3 Series was becoming increasingly important, and its performance versions were attracting drivers who wanted something more exciting than a traditional luxury sedan. BMW had established its territory. Now Mercedes was coming after it. And Mercedes had an answer, the 190E2.3-16. From the outside, it was still a W201, still compact, still unmistakably a Mercedes. But underneath that familiar shape, the philosophy had changed. Mercedes worked with Cosworth Engineering to develop a sophisticated 16-valve cylinder head for the 4-cylinder engine. The result was a higher revving engine with considerably more performance potential than the standard 190. But Mercedes didn't simply install a more powerful engine and call it a day. The suspension was revised. The braking system was upgraded. The steering was tuned for a more responsive feel. The body received subtle aerodynamic changes, and the entire car was prepared to deal with the additional performance. This wasn't just a faster 190, it was Mercedes taking the basic W201 formula and rebuilding it around the driver. The company wanted to prove that a compact Mercedes could be more than comfortable. It could be exciting, it could be fast, and it could compete. The 2.3-16 changes everything. When the 190E2.3-16 appeared, it changed the way people looked at the W201. The standard 190 was practical and sophisticated. The 2.3-16 had attitude. It had a sportier stance, a more purposeful interior, a different engine character, and most importantly, a completely different purpose. Mercedes wasn't just building a compact sedan anymore. It was building a car that wanted to be driven hard, and there was only one place to find out whether the engineering actually worked: a racetrack. The W201 suddenly made sense in a completely different environment. A compact rear-wheel drive Mercedes with sophisticated suspension and a high-performance engine had exactly the kind of foundation that could be developed for touring car racing. And Mercedes knew it. The company began preparing the W201 for motorsport. This wasn't simply about advertising. Racing could expose weaknesses that ordinary road driving might never reveal: heat, brakes, suspension, aerodynamics, engine durability. Everything would be tested, and everything that survived the track could teach Mercedes something about the car on the road. The W201 was no longer simply being developed as a road car. It was being pushed towards something much more serious: the Nürburgring Challenge. And if Mercedes wanted to demonstrate what the 190E2.3-16 could really do, there was almost no better place to do it than the Nürburgring. The circuit was famous for its long straights, fast corners, elevation changes, bumps, and technical sections. It could expose weaknesses in almost every part of a performance car. So Mercedes organized a special race in 1984 featuring the new performance 190, and the driver lineup was remarkable. Experienced racers were there, future stars were there, and among them was a young Brazilian driver named Ayrton Senna. At the time, Senna wasn't yet the global Formula One icon he would become, but his talent was already obvious. Then the race began, and when it was over, Senna had won. For Mercedes, that result meant far more than a single race victory. The 190 had just demonstrated that it could compete in a completely different world. The little Mercedes wasn't simply a compact luxury sedan anymore. It had motorsport credibility. It could race. And Mercedes had just discovered how much potential was hiding inside the W201. But this was only the beginning. From road car to racing machine, the W201's motorsport story became much more serious as touring car racing grew in popularity. The German Touring Car Championship, known as DTM, was becoming a major battleground for European manufacturers. BMW was there, Ford was there, Audi was there, and Mercedes wanted a place at the front. The W201 was the weapon. But building a competitive racing car required much more than adding horsepower. The rules required manufacturers to base their racing machines on production cars. That created an interesting situation. Mercedes couldn't simply build a race car and forget about the road version. The road-going 190 itself had to provide the foundation. Motorsport wasn't just inspiring the W201, it was helping determine what versions of the W201 Mercedes would build. And that relationship would eventually produce an even more extreme car: the 190E 2.5-16. Bigger engine, bigger ambition. The 2.5-16 represented another step forward. The engine was enlarged to 2.5 liters. Performance increased, the chassis was developed further, and Mercedes continued refining the car's ability to handle high-speed driving. But the competition wasn't standing still. BMW was getting faster. The other manufacturers were getting faster. And in touring car racing, being good wasn't enough. You had to be better. That meant Mercedes had to push the W201 further, much further, the Evolution cars. Mercedes began developing special Evolution versions of the 190. These weren't ordinary trim packages. They were created with motorsport requirements in mind. The first major step was the 190E 2.5-16 Evolution, known simply as the Evo 1. It featured a more performance-focused engine and chassis. The car looked different from the standard 190, but the real changes were underneath. The suspension could be adjusted more extensively. The braking system was improved. The engine was developed for greater performance, and the body was modified to accommodate the hardware needed for serious competition. The Evo 1 was already an extreme interpretation of the 190, but Mercedes wasn't finished. Then came the car that would become the most famous of them all. The Evolution 2. The Evo 2. If the standard W201 was understated, the Evo 2 was anything but. Look at one today, and the first thing you'll notice is the bodywork, the huge rear wing, the aggressive front spoiler, the widened fenders, the purposeful stance. It looked like a racing car that somehow escaped onto the street, and in many ways, that was exactly what it was. The Evo 2 was developed around Mercedes's motorsport ambitions. Its aerodynamic package wasn't simply there to make the car look aggressive, it was designed to improve high-speed stability and generate additional downforce. The suspension could be adjusted to suit different driving conditions. The engine was further developed, and the entire car became more focused. For a compact four-door sedan, the Evo 2 was an extraordinary machine, but its importance went beyond the numbers. It represented the moment when the small Mercedes had reached the extreme end of its performance potential. The car that began as an efficient compact sedan had become a machine built around speed, balance, and competition. The little 190 had become a genuine racing weapon, the battle with BMW. And by this point, the rivalry between Mercedes and BMW was impossible to ignore. BMW had its 3 Series, Mercedes had the 190. Both manufacturers approached the problem differently. BMW focused heavily on driving dynamics and sportiness. Mercedes emphasized engineering, refinement, safety, and durability. But now both companies were fighting for the attention of drivers who wanted more than luxury. They wanted character, they wanted performance, and they wanted a car that could make an ordinary road interesting. The W201 gave Mercedes a platform that could compete, and the performance versions gave the company something it hadn't had before in quite the same way: a personality. The 190 wasn't just the conservative Mercedes anymore. It could be aggressive, it could be fast, it could go sideways, it could compete on a racetrack, and it could still drive home afterward. That combination became one of its greatest strengths. Why the W201 worked so well? There was something about the basic architecture of the W201 that made it such a strong platform for development. It was relatively compact, it was rear-wheel drive, the suspension was sophisticated, the chassis was strong, and Mercedes engineers had created a platform with plenty of potential. That meant the same basic car could take on completely different roles. A diesel-powered 190 could be an efficient daily driver. A standard gasoline model could be a comfortable commuter. A 2.3-16 could become a serious performance sedan. And an Evo 2 could become a collector's dream. Different versions, different purposes, but the same underlying identity. That versatility is one of the reasons the W201 remains so fascinating. It could be sensible without being boring, it could be luxurious without being enormous, and it could be transformed into a performance machine without losing the character of the original car. The American connection. The W201 also played an important role in expanding Mercedes-Benz's appeal in the American market. The 190 arrived at a time when European luxury brands were becoming increasingly attractive to American consumers. For many American buyers, the car offered something different from the large domestic sedans that dominated the roads. It was smaller, more European, more focused on handling, and unmistakably premium. The 190E gave American buyers another way to enter the Mercedes-Benz world. You didn't necessarily need a massive luxury sedan anymore. You could drive a compact Mercedes, and for younger buyers especially, that made the brand more accessible. The W201 was helping change the perception of what a Mercedes could be. The everyday 190. But there was something important happening outside the racetracks. Most people who bought a 190 weren't buying an Evo 2. They weren't preparing for DTM. They weren't looking for a racing machine. They were buying transportation. They wanted something comfortable, something reliable, something that could handle daily driving. And the ordinary 190 did exactly that. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. You could drive one to work every morning, take it on a long road trip, park it at the grocery store, and it would still feel like a proper Mercedes. That was the genius of the W201. The same basic platform that could become a DTM-inspired performance machine could also be a perfectly sensible daily driver. Very few cars manage that combination successfully. The interior philosophy inside, the 190 continued the Mercedes philosophy of the era. Everything had a purpose. The dashboard was designed around the driver. The controls were straightforward. The materials were durable. And the cabin wasn't overloaded with technology. There were no giant digital displays, no complicated touchscreen menus, no endless electronic settings. Instead, there were physical switches, mechanical controls, clear instruments, and a driving environment that asked you to focus on the road. For modern drivers, that simplicity can feel almost strange, but it is also part of the W201's appeal. You sit down, you start the engine, you put the car in gear, and you drive. There is very little between you and the machine. The feeling of speed. And that brings us to another reason the W201 became so important to enthusiasts. Speed feels different when the car doesn't have enormous power. Modern performance sedans can produce incredible numbers, hundreds of horsepower, all-wheel drive, computer-controlled suspension, launch control, electronic stability systems. The W201 came from a different world. The driver had to participate. You had to understand the car. You had to manage the throttle. You had to choose your line. And you had to respect the limits of the chassis. The car wasn't doing everything for you. It was communicating with you. That made the experience more involving. And for many enthusiasts, that feeling is difficult to replace, from cheap used car to collector car. For years, many W201s were simply used cars. They were old Mercedes. They were affordable. They were practical. And because they had been built in large numbers, they weren't always treated as classics. But time changes everything. As more W201s disappeared from the roads, clean examples became harder to find. People began realizing that the cars they had once considered ordinary were actually important pieces of Mercedes-Benz history. The performance versions became especially desirable. The 2.3-16, the 2.5-16, the Evolution models. Cars that had once represented Mercedes' attempt to enter a new performance market were now becoming collector cars. And suddenly, the W201 wasn't just an old Mercedes, it was a classic. What enthusiasts see, when an enthusiast sees a clean W201 today, they don't just see an old sedan, they see an era. They see a Mercedes designed before modern technology completely changed the driving experience. They see a compact rear-wheel drive chassis, simple mechanical controls, the influence of motorsport, and engineering designed around durability. That's why a clean W201 can attract attention at a car meet, even when it's parked next to much newer and more expensive vehicles. The car doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be heavily modified. Its history speaks for itself. The final years. As the 1990s approached, the automotive world continued to change. Mercedes was developing a new generation of compact cars, and the W201 had already achieved what it was designed to do. It had brought new buyers to Mercedes. It had proven the company's ability to compete in the compact luxury segment. It had created a successful performance platform, and it had become deeply connected to motorsport. Eventually, production came to an end. But the story of the 190 didn't end when the last cars left the factory. In some ways, that was when the legend really began. Because once a car disappears from showrooms, people start to look at it differently. The ordinary becomes classic, the old becomes historic, and the cars that were once taken for granted become reminders of another era. The real legacy of the 190. The W201's greatest achievement wasn't simply that it sold well. Its greatest achievement was changing Mercedes-Benz. The company proved that a compact car could still be a serious Mercedes. That opened the door to future generations of smaller models. It expanded the company's audience, and it showed that Mercedes could compete with BMW in a segment where driving dynamics mattered more than sheer size. But the W201 also left a legacy among enthusiasts. It showed what could happen when engineers were given the freedom to develop a car properly. Sometimes the result isn't the most powerful car. Sometimes it isn't the most luxurious. Sometimes it's simply the car that gets the important things right. The W201 was one of those cars. It was small enough to be practical, sophisticated enough to feel special, strong enough to last, and capable enough to become a performance icon. The small Benz becomes a legend. The Mercedes-Benz 190 W201 started with a simple idea: build a smaller Mercedes. But the result became much bigger than that original idea. It became a new entry point into the Mercedes-Benz brand. It became a symbol of engineering discipline. It became a successful racing platform. It became a rival to BMW. It became the foundation for some of the most desirable performance Mercedes of its era. And eventually, it became a legend. The W201 proved that a Mercedes didn't have to be enormous to make an impression. It didn't need a massive engine. It didn't need a huge interior. It didn't need excessive styling. It needed the right combination of engineering, balance, and character. And that's exactly what Mercedes gave it. The small Benz had grown up. It had gone from a risky experiment to one of the most respected compact cars of its generation. And decades later, that reputation has only become stronger. Because when you look past the simple bodywork and modest dimensions, you begin to understand what the W201 really was. It was Mercedes-Benz refusing to compromise. It was engineering packed into a smaller package. It was a car designed to be useful, but engineered to be exceptional. And that's why the Mercedes-Benz 190 W201 remains more than just an old car. It remains a piece of Mercedes-Benz history, a piece of automotive history, and for many enthusiasts, one of the greatest examples of the classic Mercedes philosophy. The 190 may have been the small Benz, but it was never a small achievement. And that is the story of the Mercedes-Benz 190 W201A, the small Benz that became a legend. What started as Mercedes-Benz's attempt to build a smaller, more accessible sedan eventually became something far more important. It changed the company's direction, proved itself on the road and on the racetrack, and earned the respect of generations of drivers. Even today, the W201 represents something special, a time when engineering, simplicity, and durability came before screens, electronics, and endless complexity. And maybe that's why this little Mercedes still has such a strong following. Because it wasn't built to be flashy, it was built to be good, and it became legendary by doing exactly that. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories from automotive history. And tell us in the comments, Would you still drive a Mercedes-Benz 190W201 today? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.